Judgments, Babylon comes to mind. God has something specific for her. She's typified as a harlot or a whore that rides the beast, the seven-headed beast, the seven nations. As God strikes that blow, the Bible says that everybody weeps, that the merchants that are out at sea, they're weeping because they see the destruction. And everybody cries because she possesses everything everybody wants. So that immediately takes, or at least eliminates, much of what we refer to as the religious system that we've been taught, because for so many years the church has taught that is a false church that's possibly the Catholic Church. They've made it Jehovah's Witnesses. People even go so far as to insult God and make it the U.S., as if God is going to destroy the U.S. because it possesses everything. And you've got a lot of people, and it's mostly the ideals or the viewpoints of ethnics from other places that come to this country and just see us have everything. And basically, for the lack of better terms, they're just player haters. They don't like the idea that we have, and they don't. And that becomes something that becomes even a tarnish to us, where even people now in our country, they got this attitude where they're embarrassed that we have so much. And I'll tell you, that's nothing to be embarrassed about. That's actually the blessings of God. But we have this backlash on us where we look at other countries, we look at other places, other peoples, and we look at the lack that they have in their lives, and we almost feel guilty that we have food we throw away. We feel guilty that there's, we drive off to church in one car and got two left in the driveway, and there's only two of us. There's a lot of things that we dislike ourselves for, and that's actually a trend and a mindset that is now permeating America, and that is that idea that we think little of ourselves rather than to look at ourselves the way God sees us. The reason we're in this nation or in this state is because we are the blessed of God, and people just don't like the idea. They constantly want us to hate ourselves. So a lot of people that preach Babylon say it's America, but it's not America. Babylon cannot be America because it's from America that the Bible gets preached. It's from America that Bibles gets applied to the greater parts of the world. It's from America that probably the church spearheads almost every major Christian movement around the world. So you can't say we're Babylon on one hand and on the other hand say that we're Manasseh or that agent of God to fulfill his last day prophecies. So what we're finding out is that Babylon is more than just a religious system. It's more than just a nation or a group of people per se. It's literally a religion that comes about as a result of a financial system that began way back in about 1500 BC with Ur-Nammu and Babylon. And that's what we're reading about. Now, we left off in Rule by Secrecy. We're talking about a man who was actually up for Man of the Century. And again, he wasn't up for Man of the Century because of the good things or the great things that he did. He's up for Man of the Century because of his influence and what his particular lifespan did to a century. And I think there is no doubt that even in my mind, and again, not thinking of a good guy or a bad guy, when we talk about somebody who influenced the 20th century, probably none influenced it as much as Adolf Hitler. And we're reading about this fellow, where he came from and what he's about. And we're finding out that a lot of these things we've been taught in school, they're nothing more than just lies. They're nothing more than just landscapes painted by folk that want us to understand or view things a certain way. And we've often said it, that it's funny that in English we view history as history. But what history really is, it's his story. Whoever's telling it, it's his story. So it depends on who's telling it that gives you the bias, or whoever's telling it gives you their point of view or their spin on things. So let's read a little more about this fellow. Let's see, we're reading Hitler's support group, despite his clear intentions to nationalize. Now we were talking about how he changed the name of literally the Nazi Party, or the National Working Party. He changed it to the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Suddenly he wants it to be socialist. Now again, socialist. We always look at Hitler and talk about what a bad guy he was. And everybody gets the impression that this bad guy Hitler, every idea of his was perverse, and that it had some demonic or almost some devilish twist to it. And yet, nobody sees that when it happens here, nobody sees it any more evil. But here Hitler and this movement, again, it always comes out of a knee-jerk response to trouble and tribulation that they were going through. But the German people were going through a tremendous depression. Poverty was hitting. These people were in a state of decline ever since that Treaty of Versailles that left them impotent as a nation. And they're having bad times. And it was good to blame it on the people with money. It was good to blame the problem or the issue on those who are profiting. And it wasn't your fault that you didn't go to school. It wasn't your fault that you didn't have a trade. It wasn't your fault that you were working for somebody who had things. It's their fault. And I want you to see that the devil plays the same games, just like we're reading in the Maccabees. The devil isn't stupid. He uses the same games and the same tricks and the same devices on us over and over and over and over again, repeatedly. And human nature doesn't change. When we see it affect human nature to an extent in history, and then we watch that same cycle continuously repeat itself, we're foolish to fall into that same pattern. But one of the reasons that Hitler was able to literally get into the minds of the German people, because when we look at it from the West, don't we all agree that anybody who followed that guy was nuts? I mean, because we know about him in retrospect. We know about him historically. When we look at Hitler, when we look at a man like Hitler, our whole idea is, how did he deceive a nation? How did he lead a nation? How did he gain such respect with these people that he caused such an uprising that he would in fact be up for man of the century? And I think because of what he did, he didn't get it. But there's no other man in history that did what this guy did. Now, granted, it was bad. But he changed the way people think. He changed the way the world moved. He changed the way things happen. Now, the same thing happened. People are disgruntled, and they start to blame it on the boss. They start to blame it on the guy who owns the farm. They start to blame it on the guy who owns the factories. They start to blame it on the guy that's prospering, while they're out there picking their measly little life, trying to eat their little crumbs of bread. It bothers them that somebody's down the street eating bowls of soup with chicken and steak and all the other fixings. It just drives them crazy, especially if you can attribute to it some Jewish secret plot to take Germany. So he takes this workers' party and he says, we're going to change it to the Nationalist Socialist Party. And what's a socialist? See, we've talked about this before. Socialism isn't just a share the wealth. That's what they want us to think. See, people eating soup wish that they could eat the steak for free. See, this is the way the devil works. He makes you think that somebody owes you something. See, even in the garden, when God said to Adam, of all the trees in the garden you can freely eat, your job is to till the ground. If Adam was going to eat, he had to go do some work. If Eve was going to eat, she had responsibility. This was the intention in the garden. The devil comes and says to the woman, hey, surely you can eat from all the trees, can't you? She said, yeah. Well, check this one out. This one's good for food. On top of that, this one will make you like gods, knowing good and evil. And she took from the tree and gave to her husband Adam. What was the devil trying to say? You all just a measly little schmucks down here. You ain't like gods. Yet the Bible makes it clear they were created in his very image. Everything that the devil saw in God that he couldn't have, he saw in Adam and Eve. The Bible says he crowned them with glory and honor. Everything that made him God, he put on them. You couldn't get any closer to God than Adam and Eve. Exact image and likeness of God. That's what the Bible says. But the devil comes along and says, oh, you just a bunch of lowly old folk here. You don't know good from evil. Same temptation. I mean, a lot of people make some terrible choices in life, and their life sucks, granted. They got a lot more trial and tribulation than other people. They don't choose to do things properly, so they end up with more problems. And then when the stuff hits the fan, it's always somebody else's fault. It's them rich people. Now, we just got done with, in fact, yesterday was the tax deadline for people. People had to get their taxes in. That's provided you owe. But it was a tax deadline. Now, how many of you understand that the richest people in the United States carry the majority of the tax burden? Now look, how many of you understand that if you're making $500,000, $1 million, how many of you understand that you probably get a little more tax credit, or you get better tax breaks when you're able to have that kind of money, right? But who puts more in the system? Guy making $500,000, guy making $50,000? So who pays the majority of the tax bill in this country? The wealthy do. See, we got the same attitude that the devil uses all over the place, and historically everybody wants to be socialist. They want it to be even across the board. Now, what makes a guy rich? He works hard. Sometimes you make a good choice. You go to college, you get educated, you do everything you can to take advantage of things. You enlighten yourself. Power. Hitler takes a bunch of people who are hurting, downtrodden, beat up, and he says, we're all workers. We're important. In fact, these guys with the factories wouldn't be anything without us. Now, we know that ain't true. You can go across the border to Poland and get workers. They don't want to work, right? Look, Southern California is a great example of that. You can't get white people to pick lettuce. Huh? White people ain't busboys. Are they? If they don't want to do it here, where we get them from? Across the border, right? Now, I'm not making nothing up. Now, tell me that those crossing the border people, that somebody can't organize them and say, well, we want the same as you guys. I'd go rent buses, send them back. You get enough people hollering this stuff, what happens? You end up with Hitlers. You end up with people who tell you they know better. They're going to give you what you want. You ever hear the saying? Be careful what you wish for, because you might get it. Now, one of the things, he gave people jobs. He got them fed. Began probably one of the greatest mass production factory nations in history. You didn't get to enjoy your money because you got to wear a uniform and go off to war. Despite his clear intentions to nationalize and curtail the power of international business and finance, Hitler had little trouble getting funds from the corporate sponsors who saw National Socialism as a welcome alternative to communism. So Hitler himself, with this Workers' Party and with this new movement, the Socialist Party, this National Socialist Party, he now took socialism and equated it now to National Socialism, which basically means if you're patriotic to Germany, you got to be a socialist. So if you're a socialist, are you in favor of big business? Huh? No. Because they're the pigs. They're the guys that got everything. They're responsible for your poverty. Now, can somebody name one rich person that's responsible for your state of being today? Huh? Well, I guess at a larger scale, to a certain extent, somebody can cry, but you did not go to college because somebody's rich. You did not go out and assert yourself in a position because somebody else is making millions. Everything becomes personal choice. If this is, in fact, the land of the free, then you can be whatever you want to be. And I'm talking in the sense of your career. But this is what draws people to people like Hitler. Get somebody going around saying to a bunch of people who... You ever watch these people on the news? They go into the ghetto, and they go into social workers, and they go get all these kids who never went to school jobs to make $16.50 an hour because they figured out that at $16.50 an hour they can pay rent in Southern California and buy themselves a car and take care of themselves. You ever hear these people? They come out on the news. Now, how come people that don't make right choices, how come they get rewarded? A girl gets knocked up, has babies out of wedlock, and she gets all the help. Why do they get rewarded in this life? I'm just telling you, this is how these people come to power. They give the people what they want. And in essence, what do the people really get? You get nothing. Now let me ask you this. Do the rich people really give up their money in these systems? See, people walk around always blaming rich people. For the rich people have nothing to do with what you become in life. I'm not who I am because somebody's rich. I'm not who I should be or If I don't reach my or achieve my goal or my dream, it's not because somebody's rich. Hitler, despite the fact that he's opposing big business, he's opposing these international bankers, he's opposing these banking systems, who's funding him? The bankers, because they say, we like this guy better than the communists. Now, check this out. If the workers aren't going to work for the rich guy, who are they going to work for in a national socialist system? The government. Well, doesn't in essence the government become the boss? Ain't the government rich? So what's going on? Basically, you're doing what Jesus says. You're just choosing a master. And I'm going to tell you what, when it's the government that's your boss, you're really in trouble. Huh? Because at least with your rich boss, if he's a jerk, you go quit and go work for the other rich boss that'll treat you with more respect. Now, if you don't like bosses, go make your own business. But you can't get mad at a rich guy. Hitler gets support from the very companies and the very businesses that he opposes. How many of you learned that in school? Adolf Hitler lost a popular election to the aging war hero Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg in 1932. 39 business leaders with familiar names like Krupp, Siemens, Thyssen, Bosch signed a petition to Hindenburg urging Hitler to be appointed Chancellor of Germany. The deal brought Hitler into the government was cut at the home of Baron Kurt von Schroeder on January 4, 1933. According to Eustace Mullen, also attending the meeting were John Foster, Allen Dulles of New York, of the New York law firm of Sullivan and Cromwell, representing the Schroeder Bank. That's where we ended up last week. Army and senior officials were becoming alarmed over Hitler's power, especially with some 3 million stormtrooper detachments or brown shirts under the command of Hitler's SA chief Ernest Röhm. Now, the brown shirts or these SA are what later form his idea of the SS after he takes control of these guys. The army proposed a deal. If the power of the SA was broken, the military would pledge loyalty to Hitler. Hitler agreed on June 30, 1934. Trumped up charges of plotting revolution caused Röhm and hundreds of brown shirts to be fatally purged, and the SA quietly faded away. Basically what they did was they went in and killed them and accused them of being homosexual, because they were. This is true. A lot of these guys were homosexuals, and Hitler said, that's why I killed them, because they were plotting against me and they were gay. Now, for a guy that's for the people, that don't sound too cool, does it? With the death of 87-year-old Hindenburg, August 1934, Hitler merged with the offices of President and Chancellor and proclaimed himself Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, the absolute leader or the Führer of all Germany. With both the government and military now firmly in hand, Hitler knew that it was time to make deals with international bankers and industrialists. This proved to be an easy task, considering their multinational nature. Now, as soon as he becomes the Führer, who does he go to for help? The international bankers. With both the military and government firmly in hand, Hitler knew that it was time to make deals with international bankers and industrialists. This proved to be an easy task, considering the multinational nature. 1930s, many people in both Britain and America viewed Nazi ideology favorable. Now, when do you ever read in history that America thought being a Nazi was favorable? Now, isn't that the way America viewed on the Bolshevik Revolution? America thought it was cool and said, hey, forget the atrocities, let's look at all the good that's happening. Now that we look at history and history gets rewritten, nobody admits that they liked it. Could you imagine anybody in American politics saying Hitler was good? Now, this is why God hates Babylon. In the 1930s, many people in Britain and America viewed Nazi ideology favorably. 1934, there was even a failed attempt by Morgan and DuPont agents to bring about a fascist dictatorship in the United States, as detailed in his book, Alien Agenda. That's another Jim Marrs book. Automobile maker Henry Ford became a guiding light to Hitler. How many of you ever knew that? Henry Ford, industrialist, who made the first production line with his T-model cars. Now, anybody ever tell you that in school when they're telling you about the great industrialist Henry Ford? Anybody ever tell you about how he went out to Germany and got decorated by Hitler? How come they leave that out of our books? Automobile maker Henry Ford became a guiding light to Hitler, especially in the realm of anti-Semitism. I didn't know Henry Ford hated Jews. Did you all know that? Henry Ford hated Jews. He's a guiding light to Hitler. Boy, you got to be screwed up to be his guiding light, huh? Especially in the realm of anti-Semitism. In 1920, Ford published an anti-Jewish book called The International Jew. Anybody ever hear about that one? Henry Ford? Have you driven a Ford lately? As Hitler worked on his book Mein Kampf in 1924, he copied liberal portions of Ford's writing and even referred to Ford as a great man. How many ever knew that when you read Mein Kampf, you're reading some ideology swiped from Henry Ford? How come people don't tell you this? How come you never learned this in school? Yeah, I'm sure you can. Like Hitler, Ford became an admirer of Hitler, provided funds for the Nazis. In 1938, became the first American to receive the highest Nazi honor possible for a non-German, the Grand Cross of the Supreme Order of the German Eagle. Where are these pictures? Do you think you can go over to Ford and see these pictures on the wall anywhere? You know they took pictures. Man, the Fuhrer putting this around his neck. Are you out of your mind? Where are these pictures? How come nobody ever answers to this? Huh? Where are the Jews? How come they're not suing Ford for reparations? Huh? Where's all the hollering? Hey, the way things are going now, if I was a Jew, I'd be down Ford's throat with the lawyers. I'd be pulling out these pictures. Ford became an admirer of Hitler, provided funds for the Nazis, and in 1938 became the first American to receive the highest Nazi honor possible for non-German, the Grand Cross of the Supreme Order of the German Eagle. Boy, that sounds fancy, doesn't it? Like Hitler, Ford's suspicions initially were centered on the international financiers. At first, he talked only about the big fellows and said he had nothing against the Jews in ordinary walks of life. Later, he stated they are all pretty much alike. He said he believed they were in conspiracy to bring on war for profits. Now, see, he's right about the war for profits and the money stuff. His problem is that he's making it all a Jewish plot when the Jewish people that are involved with the Germans, the Americans, the Brits, and these other fellas, they don't have any nationality. They don't have any loyalty to a nation or even a pedigree as far as people are concerned. These people have only one nationality. That's money. But Henry Ford initially just blamed it on the Jews. Ford said he learned this in 1915 when he chartered a ship to Europe in an unsuccessful attempt to negotiate an end to the war there. Later, he said the Jewish passengers on the boat told him that it was an international Jewish bankers who arranged wars for profit, and that his peace effort would be in vain unless he contacted certain Jews in France and England, undoubtedly referring to the Rothschilds. Now, see, this is what happens to people. You know, you catch a little tidbit of knowledge somewhere, and it'll skew and twist your mind. Listen, you know, there's always much more involved. Listen, you know what the problem is in our country today? People think they're informed because they watch the news that's on for 20 minutes in an evening. They're driving on the freeway and they put on KFWB that says the whole world in 20 minutes. What's the saying? You give us 20 minutes, we'll give you the world. 22 minutes, you'll give you the world. Now what in the hell are you going to learn in 22 minutes that happened in the world? Huh? Whenever you see things happening in politics, you know, and this is the problem. You know, Americans, we don't want to read anymore. This is why Johnny can't read at home, because he never sees the parents read. The only way you're going to inform yourself on things is actually to read. You can't know anything if you don't read. This is why Voltaire said, "He that reads the books rules the world." have any idea what you can learn from reading books? I mean, this whole, I was at a bookstore. Me and my wife were laughing because they have this huge section. It's called self-help. Self-help. I mean, everything from raising kids, fixing your mind, getting your job and how to dress for success. And look, if somebody's got to show you how to do it in a book, is it self-help? You ever thought about that? Self-help? It's like, you don't need to go to school. You don't need to read. Just read this book. That's why they got those dummies books. Figure you ain't going to learn it the conventional way. You're not going to learn it the right way. You may as well get the dummies version. You imagine getting rich off of the dummies and making a mint? You make so much money, you can't stop. You got computer for dummy, 10 key for dummy, typing for dummies. They even got like divorce for dummies. You ever see that stuff? They got divorce for dummies. They got everything for dummies. I think that the dummies in this country just so overflowing, there ain't nothing you can't teach dummies. But people hear a little nugget of something and then they get all scared. See, this is why you got people. You ever see people protest? And you're sitting there watching them protest on television and you're saying, why are they protesting? And they're protesting because somebody said something and they ain't never read a newspaper account on it. They have never done any research. They don't even know who the person is that they feel was wrong. They don't know anything about the issue, but they're all out there shouting and screaming. And if you went and posed an intelligent question to any one of these schmucks you grab out of the picket line, do you know that 9 out of 10 times he won't know what to say? Just a bunch of stupid sheep. Dumb lambs. Somebody said to Henry Ford, for you coming across the ocean to make peace ain't going to work. You got to deal with those Jews who are running the country from France and Britain. And next thing you know, he's standing on a podium getting the highest decoration from Hitler. Because he learned to hate Jews like this. Hitler, too, initially kept his verbal attacks confined to the international bankers. Isn't that something? How it starts off, they hate international bankers, but then it ends up on the Jews? Now, how do you think that happens? Huh? That's like in this country. Minorities at first, they hate whitey. Before you really get your shot at whitey, you start beating up the Irish, the Chinese, the Mexican, everybody else starts fighting, huh? I guess they had the right target at first, but what happens? They end up thinking it's Jews. Hitler, too, initially kept his verbal attacks confined to international bankers, particularly the Rothschilds. In speeches during the 1920s, Hitler praised the German industrialists such as Alfred Krupp, while condemning the rapacity of a Rothschild who financed wars and revolutions and brought the peoples into interest servitude through loans. So Hitler understood this. Despite these attacks, the emerging Nazi power continued to find support in Britain, even within the Rothschild-dominated bank system of England. On New Year's Day 1924, the financial fate of Germany was settled in London at a meeting between Hjalmar Schacht of the New Reich Commission for National Currency and Montague Norman, governor of the Bank of England. Noted John Toland, Schacht, who had already abolished emergency money, began with a frank disclosure of Germany's desperate financial situation. He then proposed to open a German credit second to the Reichsbank, but one which would issue notes in pound sterling. Schacht asked Norman to provide half the capital for this new bank and declared what prospect such a measure would afford for economic collaboration between Great Britain's world empire and Germany. Now, see, a lot of people in America, they think Germany was always somebody we hated. And what they don't realize is that over 600,000 of the initial 600,000 people from the initial 13 colonies were actually from Europe. And that a lot of these people, they didn't want to speak English, they wanted to speak German. So we grew up in our generations, and we just, ever since I was born, we were supposed to hate the Germans. Because we grew up watching war movies. We knew what they did in World War I, World War II. They don't tell us they're pals. It's like I remember doing the Iranian hostage crisis when they took our hostages out of the embassy in Iran. Got whole generations grew up during that time, and they all hate Iran. They don't know that we were buddies with Iran. Huh? They forget that when the Ayatollah came in and we didn't like Iraq and Iran anymore, we gave Saddam money. And we were his friends too. And that all his fighter pilots were trained in Texas. How quickly history allows us to forget that we were all buddies at one time. Within 48 hours, Norman not only formally approved the loan, which was exceptionally low interest, but a 5% flat, but convinced a group of London bankers to accept bills far exceeding the loan. William Bramley noted these international banking concessions. Max Warburg, the German banker, his brother Paul Warburg, who has been instrumental in establishing the Federal Reserve System in the United States, they were directors of the Intersen Gemeinschaft Farben of IG Farben, the giant German chemical firm that produced Zyklon B gas used in Nazi extermination camps. And how come Paul Warburg, he's the guy from the Federal Reserve. Could you imagine these guys taking money and being buddies with the folk that make the gas the Jews? Now, some of you remember when the Iron Curtain fell and the cameras finally got to go into East Germany and look at stuff, and the same company was making ovens. We're still making ovens. Let's see. Could you imagine? When do you ever read that the head of our Federal Reserve Bank was also the chairman of this chemical company that made the gas the Jews? When do you ever read that? Paul Warburg, his brother Max Warburg was he was a Nazi who was in charge of the war finance in Germany, or the German bank. H.A. Metz of IG Farben was a director of the Warburg Bank of Manhattan. That's very nice. Later became the Rockefeller Chase Manhattan Bank. I guess the gas business is pretty good. Standard Oil in New Jersey had been a cartel partner with IG Farben prior to the war. One American IG Farben director was C.E. Mitchell, who was also director of the Federal Reserve Bank in New York and one of Warburg's National City Bank presidents. The president of IG Farben in Germany, Hermann Schmitz, served on the boards of the Deutsche Bank and the Bank for International Settlements. In 1929, Schmitz was voted president of the board of National City Bank and now Citibank. Must be good business, man. You think that Zyklon B gas had some good stock? It was a great career move for these fellows, wasn't it? Paul Manning, a CBS News correspondent in Europe during World War II, wrote that Schmitz he held as much stock in Standard Oil in New Jersey as did the Rockefellers. Schmitz also controlled IG Farben companies in Japan. After the war, 24 IG Farben executives would stand trial at Nuremberg for crimes against humanity. I guess so. Including the building and maintenance of concentration camps, the use of slave labor. We're going to skip some of this. You'll like this one. Another American supporter of Hitler was Joseph P. Kennedy. Isn't that American Camelot? Huh? The American First Family? Huh? Another American supporter of Hitler was Joseph P. Kennedy, father of the future president. Surprise. On May 3, 1941, President Roosevelt was advised by FBI Director J. Everett Hoover that Joseph P. Kennedy, the former ambassador to England, and Ben Smith, the Wall Street operator, sometime in the past had meetings with Nazi Luftwaffe Chief Hermann Goering in Vichy, France. And thereafter, Kennedy and Smith had donated considerable amounts of money to the German cause. They are both described as being very anti-British and pro-German. I guess those Irish, they never did get along with the English, huh? And support for Hitler continued to grow in Britain. According to Howard Katz, in the spring of 1934, a select group of financiers gathered around Montague Norman, head of the Bank of England. Hitler had disappointed his critics. His regime was no temporary nightmare, but a system with a good future. Mr. Norman advised his directors to include Hitler in their plans. There was no opposition, and it was decided that Hitler should get covert help from London's financial section until Mr. Norman succeeded in putting sufficient pressure on the government to make it abandon its pro-French policy for a more promising pro-German orientation. Considerable financial aid also came from Sir Henry Dieterding, the powerful head of Royal Dutch Shell Oil, who lived in London. His motive stemmed from his hope that Hitler, who had made it clear in Mein Kampf that he intended to subjugate Russia, might regain Dieterding's assets in Baku, Granzi, and Maycop oil fields. Now, again, I don't know if you understand this, but during the war, one of the you know all those Georgian satellite countries? In fact, even right now, while we're at war against terrorism, do you know that there is an oil pipeline that is under construction and being built? Do you know why Hitler? Think about this. Russia was backwards. Russia, they really didn't have anything to offer. So why did Hitler take his Nazi war machine, and rather than to conquer Europe, why did he set up a front against Russia? What was he after? He's after the oil. In fact, one of his birthday parties, the cake was shaped like that region of the world because they said they were going to give him this oil-rich land for his birthday. The same land that's in contention today. And we got our noses so far up their backsides that for the most part people don't understand why. You ever notice why that part of the world was so quickly stabilized after the Russians pulled out? They got something for us. Hitler made it clear in Mein Kampf he intended to subjugate Russia. They were after the oil. Why would these powerful businessmen, with all their financial links to the great Rothschild empire, support the overtly anti-Jewish Hitler? Part of the answer might lie in the astounding assertion that Hitler was a blood relative to the Rothschilds. Walter C. Langer, a psychologist who produced a wartime psychoanalysis of Hitler for the American OSS, which is basically just a precursor to the CIA, reported that a secret pre-war Austrian police report proved Hitler's father was the illegitimate son of a peasant cook named Maria Anna Schlickenberger. Who at the time she conceived her child was employed as a servant in the home of Baron Rothschild in Vienna. So Hitler's father was an illegitimate son of a woman who worked as a housemaid in the Rothschild house in Vienna. Upon learning of her pregnancy in 1837, she left Vienna and gave birth to Hitler's father. 5 years later, she reportedly married an itinerant miller named Johann Nepomuk Heidler offered him legitimacy. Due to the illegible writing of a parish priest in changing the birth register, he changed the name of Heidler to Hitler, either by mistake or to confuse the authorities. Alois Hitler led a sad and morose life, chiefly as a government bureaucrat, married to his own second cousin, Clara Polzel. Sounds a little Appalachian here, huh? After obtaining special episcopal dispensation, Adolf was... Now, could you imagine? You're going to marry your second cousin and have Adolf Hitler as a kid, huh? Adolf was born in Braunau, Austria in 1889 when Alois was 52 years old. This incredible story might be written off as a fanciful wartime propaganda, except for the fact that the OSS never made this story public, indicating that the tale may have been considered too sensitive to publicize. The issue came up in the late 1930s when Hitler's English nephew, William Patrick Hitler, hinted to newsmen about the German leader's Jewish background. Hitler's personal attorney, Hans Frank, confirmed this scandalous information, but the name Frankenberger was substituted for Rothschild. When no record of a Frankenberger could be found in Vienna, the matter was quietly dropped by all but Hitler. Historians have long noted that the question of possible Jewish ancestry haunted Hitler throughout his life. In case someone might question a Rothschild who would consider dallying with the servants, it is instructive that the Rothschild biographer Ferguson stated that the son of one of Salomon's senior clerks recalled that by the 1940s, the Viennese Rothschild had developed somewhat reckless enthusiasm for young girls. The late Philippe Rothschild, a descendant of Nathan, in 1984, published memoirs revealing his scandalous life. He wrote, "I was a tremendous success, leaping from bed to bed like a great mountain goat. I was always convinced my father had won his spurs riding my grandmother's chambermaids." What a life. It is possible that Hitler discovered his Jewish background and his relationship to the Rothschilds, and aware of the enormous power to make or break European governments, reestablished contact with the family, wrote Epperson. This would partially explain the enormous support he received from international banking fraternity, closely entwined with the Rothschild family as he rose to power. It is obvious why Hitler or his followers, nor today's Nazis, nor the Rothschilds, nor those who desire to profit from their international power, would want the Hitler-Rothschild connection to be made public. It certainly appears that with all their wealth and power, the Rothschilds suffered little during Hitler's Holocaust. The New Encyclopedia Britannica tactfully stated, "The Rothschilds, particularly those of Vienna and Paris during the Nazi period, preserved the kind of family unity necessary to weather the great misfortunes." I guess Hitler took it easy on these folk. According to biographer Derek Wilson, various family members had narrow and traumatic escapes from Europe following German victories in 1940, but the fact remains that most of them safely gathered in New York City. Far from being destitute refugees, sometimes portrayed, some Rothschilds played crucial roles in the war effort. 1940, it was the French Maurice de Rothschild who arranged a secret meeting in Paris' Ritz Hotel between the French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud and his minister Georges Mandel, whose real name was Rothschild, through the claim that there was no relation to the banking family. Britain's Prime Minister Churchill, along with Anthony Eden, to determine the future of France. Also present was French General de Gaulle, who within a month had organized the French government London's exile in London. Another family member was Lord Victor Rothschild, provided close security to Churchill during the war. He eventually was named to the head of Britain's powerful central bankers' policy review staff. Lord Rothschild had access to all manner of leaders and experts, noted Wilson. He was responsible only to the prime minister and answerable to neither the electorate nor the civil chiefs. One exception may have been Robert Rothschild, who during World War II refused to sell his French holdings to Alfred Krupp, grandson of the great German armaments magnate Alfred Krupp. According to New Encyclopedia Britannica, the irate Krupp had Rothschild sent to the infamous death camp Auschwitz, where he was gassed. The incident, along with his exploitation of slave labor, landed grandson Krupp in front of the Nuremberg war crimes judges. Now, isn't it funny how you can actually have people like this still selling all their stuff in America, nobody says nothing? How come ain't nobody screaming? How come Jews ain't out there protesting and marching in front of the Krupp's display at the high-end stores? Huh? With or without Rothschild influence, there's no question that Hitler's rise to power rested heavily on the support of the major German banks. Schroeder's Cologne banking firm, the Deutsche Bank, Deutsche Credit Gesellschaft, and the huge insurance firm Allianz. One Deutsche Bank executive outlined a few of the bank's wartime loans: 150 million Reichmarks to the aircraft industry, 22 million to Bavarian Motor Works. Everybody likes BMWs now, huh? 10 million to Daimler Benz. They own Chrysler now. Isn't that funny? Similar amounts were loaned in 1944. At the zenith of his power, two important aspects of Hitler's position were reversed. Following the strange flight of his Lieutenant Rudolf Hess to England, that's a funny story. These guys were so into the cult, Hess decided he's going to read the cards or something. He's going to fly to England to negotiate the surrender of England. This clown got busted. Hitler officially turned against his occultism, and international order turned against him. So all these occultists, they turned on him. One of Hitler's early cronies was Rudolf Hess, who became deeply involved in the occult. He became deputy leader of the Nazi Party. Hess was also deeply involved in metaphysical studies, particularly astrology. He listened to Professor Hausdorff's explanations of the secret doctrine and was a student of Dr. Rudolf Steiner's School of Anthroposophy, the use of man's higher consciousness to contact the spirit world. Hess also was an early member of the Thule Society. We're going to stop there. We're going to read a little bit of Carol Quigley. How many like this guy yet? Where did he come from? Think about it. Was he that evil man everybody tells just sprung up out of nowhere? Sat in jail and his mind was twisted by that lonely cell. And he writes Mein Kampf. With a little help from Henry Ford. Huh? How come nobody ever tells you that? Oh, no, that doesn't bother you. You send your kids to school and they get lied to. Send your kids to school and they just get propaganda. Granted, we live in the best nation on the planet. Blessed to God. But just because we're blessed to God doesn't mean we can't handle the truth. Do people really think we're that stupid? Page 433, the Nazi regime. He subtitles it coming to power. When Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of the German Reich on January 30, 1933, he was not yet 44 years old. From his birth in Austria in 1889 to the outbreak of the war in 1914, his life had become a succession of failures. Y'all know Adolf Hitler was an artist? You ever see his paintings? Man, that guy should have kept his day job. From his birth in Austria in 1889 to his outbreak of war in 1914, his life had become a succession of failures. 7 years, from 1907 to 1914, being passed on as a social derelict in Vienna and Munich. There he had become a fanatical pan-German anti-Semite, attributing his own failures to the intrigues of international Jewry. Now, how'd you like that? You're a failure and you blame it on the Jews. You're a failure and you blame it on the system. You're a failure and you blame it on the white man. You're a failure and you blame it on everybody except where the blame belongs. And we'll stop there with that. I'm just telling you the devil doesn't play fair. The devil uses the same tricks on everybody, and if he can get people to continually repeat the same patterns, he gets what he wants. The outbreak of war in August 1914 he gave Hitler the first real motivation of his life. He became a super patriot, joined the 16th Volunteer Bavarian Infantry. He served at the front for 4 years. In his way, he was an excellent soldier. Attached to the regimental staff as a messenger for the 1st Company, he was completely happy, always volunteering for the most dangerous tasks. Although his relations with his superiors were excellent and he was decorated with the Iron Cross, 2nd class in 1914, with the Iron Cross 1st class in 1918, he was never promoted beyond private 1st class because he was not capable of having any real relationships with his fellow soldiers or taking command of any group of them. So how does this guy that can't even pass the rank of private become the Führer? Huh? Think about this. This guy can't get promoted past a private despite these high decorations. And he becomes the Führer. How does this happen? He remained on active service at the front for 4 years. During that period, his regiment suffered 3,500. His regiment of 3,500 suffered 3,200 killed in action. Hitler himself was wounded twice. These were the only 2 occasions on which he was left in the front. October 1918, he was blinded by mustard gas and sent to a hospital in Pasewalk near Berlin. When he emerged a month later, he found the war had finished. Germany was beaten and the monarchy was overturned. He refused to become reconciled to this situation, unable to accept either defeat or the republic, remembering the war was as the second great love of his life, the first being his mother. He stayed with the army and eventually became a political spy for the Reichswehr, stationed near Munich. In the course of spying the numerous political groups in Munich, Hitler became fascinated by the rantings of Gottfried Feder against the interest slavery of the Jews. Now again, when it talks about interest slavery, it's talking about debt. So here he becomes a spy for the army, but what's he spying? He's spying on businesses. And what he becomes fascinated with is what he calls interest slavery of the Jews. So anybody who's charging interest, he refers to as a Jewish plot. In the course of spying on numerous political groups in Munich, Hitler becomes fascinated by the rantings of Gottfried Feder against the interest slavery of the Jews. At some meetings, Hitler himself became a participant attacking the Jewish plot to dominate the world, or ranting about the need for a pan-German unity. Now listen, there's probably more evidence that the Catholic Church is trying to dominate the world than there are the Jews. And there's probably more evidence that the Christian church, and you can hear it every Sunday when they tell you, we're going to win the world to Jesus. Isn't that world domination? All the Jews want is their land in Israel, and leave them alone. But historically, everything's a Jewish plot, right? Now, what's the plot of the international bankers? They want to rule the world, right? But how come nobody ever points to them anymore? Now, let me ask you a question. If you want to rule the world like they do, and remember Milner's kindergarten, all right? Remember what the Rhodes Scholarship was all about, Cecil Rhodes. They want an Anglophile world ruled by them. How come nobody ever points to this anymore? See, this is another reason why they support guys like Hitler. Because as long as you got Hitler out there fighting the Jews' attempt to take over the world, and in essence, now he's trying to take over the world, what happens to the bankers? See, that's why I always tell people, especially in America, you know, you go to other countries, they don't care what color you are. If you were born in that country, you are just as national as they are. But when you come to America, what happens? You got to be African American, Mexican American. They even give you money for being different colors, huh? Now, why would Americans, now think about it, we're the ones that have freedom of speech. You can get up on Saturday Night Live and make fun of everybody from the president on down. Right? You make fun of the first lady. You can talk about her like a dog. And it's okay. If they're passing bad policy, bad laws, you can talk bad about them. But instead of the American people being concerned with what's taking place at the highest echelons of our government, what are we doing? We're arguing over a black police chief. We're arguing over a brown sheriff. We're arguing over who's what, who gets cheese this year, who gets the jobs. We're fighting about all this crap, and while we're fighting down at this level, what's happening at the top levels? They're taking over. I'm not telling you that politicians themselves, they're bought, that they're devil. Right, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that these people sincerely think that they have the answers. They're not out there lying. All of them aren't out there fronting for this international conspiracy. In fact, most of those guys don't even know they're puppets. All right. I'm just saying that the devil, Jesus says, we're aware. Paul writes about this too. We're not ignorant of the devil's devices. Jesus says the thief cometh. He told us how he comes. Through history, we can read how the devil operates or how the enemies of God operate. Do you know? We'll probably read a little bit of it. I think we don't have that much time. But do you know who actually helped support Hitler as he came into power? The church. Now, how many of you learned that in Sunday school? Huh? Now, the Protestants, they got mad first and backed out, but they supported him initially because he didn't trip on the Catholics, so they supported Hitler. Then they back out. The Catholics, they got so far up Hitler's rear end that by the time they backed out, it was too late. So the Protestants point at the Catholics and blame them. But the Protestants were right in there with them. Hitler became fascinated by the rantings of Gottfried Fieder against the interest slavery of the Jews. At some meetings, Hitler himself became a participant attacking the Jewish plot to dominate the world, or ranting about the need for pan-German unity. As a result, he was asked to join the German Workers' Party, and he did, becoming one of 60 regular members on the 7-member executive committee. The German Workers' Party had been founded by Munich locksmith Anton Drexler, January 5, 1919, as a nationalist pan-German workers' group. In a few months, Captain Ernst Röhm of Franz Eppes Corps of the Black Reichswehr joined the movement and became the conduit by which secret Reichswehr funds coming through Epp were conveyed to the party. He also began to organize strong-arm militia within the group, or called the Storm Troops, or the SA. When Hitler joined in September 1919, he was put in charge of party publicity. Since this was the chief expense, And since Hitler became the party's leading orator, public opinion soon came to regard the whole movement as Hitler's, and Rome paid Reichswehr's funds to Hitler directly. During the 1920s, the party grew from 54 to 3,000 members. It changed its name to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, purchased by the Volkseicher and B.O. Bachter with 60,000 marks of General von Epp's money, and drew up its 25-point program. The party program in 1920 was printed in the party literature for 25 years, but its provisions became more remote from attainment as the years passed. In 1920, many of its clauses were put to win support for the lower classes rather than because they were sincerely desired by the party leaders. These included the pan-Germanisms, German international equality, including abrogation of the Treaty of Versailles, living space for Germans, including colonial areas, German citizenship to be based on blood only with no naturalization, no immigration for non-Germans or Jews or other aliens, they must be eliminated. All unearned incomes were to be abolished. This stuff sounds like what people are trying to do to this country today. All earned incomes have to be abolished. The state has control of all monopolies. Excess profit taxes on corporations, to communalize the large department stores, to encourage small businesses in the allotment of government contracts, to take on agricultural land for public purposes without compensation, and to provide age-old pensions. Now, isn't that what's happening here? No, I'm going to leave this alone. You figure this out. I'm just saying we're reading about the Nazis, and it sounds like we're reading about today. How come nobody says anything? We want to live in space for Germans, including colonial areas. We want them to live everywhere. German citizenship based on blood only with no naturalization, immigration for non-Germans, Jews or other aliens eliminated. Throw them out. I hear people talking like that on the radio and television. Close the borders. Throw them out. All unearned incomes to be abolished. Can't make your own money. Why? If you do, you might become wealthy. You might become independent. Communalize large department stores. If you own a department store, what business is it of the state to come in and make your department store a commune where people can come grab stuff? Huh? To encourage small business in the allotment of government contracts. State control of all monopolies. You know, that's the difference between America and other countries. We go to Mexico. You know who owns the oil? The government. You know who owns the communications, the telephone lines? The government. You know who's in charge of all the transportation? The government. You know, in almost all parts of the world, you know who owns all those resources? The government. In America, who runs those things? It's private. Now you think they like that? Now let's go on. To punish all war profiteers. Wait a minute. To punish all war profiteers and users with death. Where's this coming from? This is them. Anybody who profits from war and people charge interest, punish them with death. To see to it that the press, education, culture, and religion conform to the morals and religious sense of the German race. As the party grew, adding members and spreading out to link up with similar movements in other parts of Germany, Hitler strengthened his control of the group. He could do this because he had control of the party newspaper and of the chief source of money, and he was also the chief public figure. As a consequence of this event, the SA was reorganized under Rome. The word socialism in the party name was interpreted to mean nationalism. Equality in a party and state were replaced by the leadership principle, the doctrine of the elite. Hitler became convinced that he must come to power by legal methods rather than by force. And we're out of time. We'll stop here. Catholic Church played a big part in bringing him into power. They don't tell you that either. All right, we're done with this. Any questions? Yeah.